Hi everybody, really pleased you can join us. Well, just before the pandemic, we were really lucky to be awarded a grant from the Garfield Weston Foundation for a project called Create a Buzz. And that was to help communicate the story of our pollinators, their plight, the real problem they're in these days, and to look at what we could do about it. And as part of this project, we had an exhibition on site, we had a trail on site, we have community projects, we work with apprentices, we have schools project, and we work with all sorts of projects. But the main component of this program is we commissioned an art installation, and we had a long list and then a short list, and we selected this amazing artist, Daisy Ginsberg, who came down to meet us, and straight away it was really apparent that Daisy was absolutely the right person to have a look at this proposal. And Daisy's background is she looked at the relationships between nature and technology, and looks at artificial intelligence, synthetic biology, conservation, biodiversity, evolution, and also an extraordinary website, which we'll take a look at in a minute. Daisy's had many international awards and is exhibited all over the world, from New York to China to Tokyo, and luckily now here at the Eden Project. So I'll hand over to Daisy in a moment. And first of all, I'd like to introduce Colin. And Colin's development manager at Eden Project. He's part of the Living Landscapes team. And Colin helped to realize Daisy's living installation at the Eden Project, and worked with all the apprentices to help to install it. And it was no mean feat. So Colin, huge thank you and appreciation. And we'll come to you in a minute to find out all about how you did that. So first of all, Daisy, when you pitched the commission, can you just tell us where you started from and why you were interested in doing this?
Well, mostly I was interested because I got to work with everyone at Eden and annoy people like Colin with questions about how to garden. And I think there were a couple of things that really excited me. So the brief was to make a sculpture about pollinators. And immediately, because I'm a troublemaker, I thought, well, why would we make a sculpture about them to bring attention to their plight? Let's make something for them. And that was really the way in for me. And I started to research pollinators. I didn't know very much about the bees, wasps, moths, ants, butterflies that are so essential to maintain our ecosystems and the planet that we share with all of them, all these other creatures. And what I learned was how bees see the world differently to us, and how butterflies see differently to bees, and different butterflies see differently, because we've all evolved different ways of perceiving the world. And you can see pictures that try and represent how a bee sees a flower, and they can see more than we can see because they can see UV, for example. So there's patterns and markings on flowers that become apparent. So if you zoom out, the question is, well, what does a garden look like to a pollinator? We make gardens to enjoy and to relax in and to feed ourselves. But if a garden were being designed by pollinators, what would we see? And that was really the beginning of the piece. So then I thought, well, how can I make a garden that I don't design? And I decided that we could make an algorithm that would actually help to stop my preferences of taste and aesthetic choices be at the foreground, and instead teach the algorithm or design the algorithm so it would make rules to create a garden from a pollinator's perspective. So what that means is that we have a palette of plants, which we worked to develop with Colin and Eden's experts and pollinator experts from around the country. And every plant has been chosen because we know it's good for particular pollinators. And then the algorithm looks at that and looks at when these flowers come into bloom and lots of different features about these plants. And every time it creates a garden design, it creates something that suits the maximum number of pollinator species possible. And that's really the definition of the problem that I laid out, was how can we design an algorithm to create the most empathetic garden possible? So for me, empathy was serving as many other species. And when you create a garden using this algorithm, you're not creating it for yourself. You're becoming a caretaker for other species. So that was the challenge I set Colin.
So Colin, who took up the challenge, how many different species did Daisy ask you to look at, and what was the process, and what did you feel about being told how to plant a garden by a computer algorithm?
I can't remember the exact amount. It was a few pages of spreadsheet I remember going through. And I think the early stages we were going through, and I think I used a traffic light system of things I thought might be invasive, things I had a question mark over, and the other ones I gave a green light because I thought they'd be fine. So that's kind of how we went through curating it. And I think it was a really bit of a brain explosion for me, because so much of our training as horticulturalists is around design. How do you put plants together to look great? I mean, this is what we spend a lot of our time thinking about. So to suddenly have an algorithm do it, it did take a bit of getting used to. But, you know, from the very early stages of getting involved in it, you knew you were involved in something quite special. I mean, it's something what we always think about at the moment, isn't it? It's not, we don't just plant for ourselves, for our own enjoyment anymore. We're always thinking about biodiversity, and this is a big part of what Eden's doing now. And every time we think about what we're going to plant, we're thinking about the benefits for every other living thing as well, and thinking about how we might measure that. So this fits right into that, but it did take a bit of getting used to it first, Jo.
And can you both tell me what was the weather like when you did it, and who helped you do it?
So
I'll start with Colin and then come back to Daisy.
Well, I think the weather wasn't too bad I mean, we spent 2 weeks doing it. So it was myself and 5 of our apprentices. I mean, there were more apprentices than that, but on average, there were about 5 there at any one time. And they did a brilliant job. So I think the total area is something in the region of 700 square meters and somewhere between 6,000 and 7,000 plants. So when we first turned up on day one, it was daunting, to say the least. So, and I don't know if you've got any pictures at any point, Daisy, of the grid that we had, because what it creates, Daisy's algorithm creates a pixelated design. And obviously 700 square meters has an awful lot of pixels, and the pixels are half meter square. So there's an awful lot of them. And the first job was to create that grid on the ground. Now, I thought that I knew what I was doing with this. I thought I had this nailed, but I did not have it nailed. So Daisy was there on that first morning and stepped in very quickly and said, no, that's not really working, is it? And it wasn't, because where we thought we had the pixels drawn out on the ground accurately, it really was not. But luckily, our apprentices stepped up to the mark and did a brilliant job. And then what we ended up doing was creating, instead of half meter squares made out on the ground, we had I think it was 2.5 square meters in the end. So that the largest size that we could use to sort of create the grid on the ground. And then within that, we had what are called quadrats. So they're sort of half meter squares, which came in handy because that was the size of the pixels. So we could use those within the bigger squares to work out where all the plants were meant to go. So we spent a couple of days doing that before we actually started any planting at all. And the day Daisy came, it was not nice weather at all. It was raining, and we had the photographers there taking pictures of us in the rain. And but it was still fun, I think.
I'd like to say at this point, I was there for more than one day, and I wasn't just ordering everyone around.
I should say that Daisy on day one was there shifting plants with everybody else.
But yeah, it got very muddy, and the site, I mean, maybe I can show the next bit of the project, so some of this mysterious language will become more clear. But at Eden, the site is, as Colin's saying, very large, 55-meter long garden. And it's on a slope and it's on a curve. So if anyone listening is good at maths, please next time help us, because laying out a grid on a curve was quite special mathematically. But Jo, shall I reveal?
Yeah. So yes, please have a reveal, because this is the first edition garden, and we're doing many more. And Daisy's done this extraordinary website to go with it. So yeah, take us through the website, Daisy.
So because this all really started as lockdown began, and for anyone listening who tried to go to the garden centre and discovered they couldn't, I was faced with a similar thing. I really wanted to be outside in nature and do some gardening, and all you could get were seeds, and there were no seeds available. And that really informed the second part of the work, which was, well, we've made this crazy algorithm that can create gardens that we have no control over. But why can't we then put it online so that anyone can do the same? And so it's taken us a long time, a year and a half, but you can visit this website at pollinator.art, and it's free to use. And you start by creating your garden. So the plant list that we created for Eden actually covers a bit more of Europe, and so you can choose your region. You can start to tell us how big your garden is. You can cut out some pixels for those paths or benches or round beds, and then choose your soil conditions. I'm going to choose loam and neutral. My site's going to be sheltered and sunny. And then you can start to play with the algorithm itself. So we did exactly the same thing for this site at Eden. So the algorithm is basically just a recipe telling you, put in these inputs of what you want, and then it solves the problem by serving as many pollinator species as possible. But you can actually tweak it a little bit. So as a gardener, you don't have much control here, but you can say, well, I want more plant species or fewer, or a more bold or more intricate pattern, or you can serve a little, you can tweak it a little bit to serve more insects like bees who follow flight paths, or more things like beetles which randomly forage, but that's only a small little tweak, but it slightly affects the patterning. And then you press create my garden, and let's hope that it works while the algorithm is somewhere on a server calculating for us. This is the moment of truth. Did it work? And what you end up with is a garden, and you can fly through it like a pollinator. And I gamely decided that I would paint every single plant in the database, just for fun. But what we've also done is made it so that you can see how the garden changes over the seasons. So this is not just thinking about what comes into bloom, but also how it's serving different functions and parts of the life cycle of different pollinators. And just to show, I'm just going to make one new one just so you believe me that it does something different every time. So if I change some of the features, we'll get different plants next time. And there's lots of fun things that we've worked on with everyone at Eden to make this really exciting for the visitor. So here's a different garden. Some of the echiums, finally. So I insisted that we would have these skyscrapers for pollinators in here. But what you can also do on the site is see it from above. So you can see how it's changing through the seasons, and see it as a planting plan. And the little green dots are grasses, which Colin insisted we needed for underplanting to stop weeds growing. And the garden is a perennial style garden. So you can actually leave seed heads over winter and then cut it all down in the spring. And I'll just show you a few of the fun other things. We've got a plant identification tool, so you can read more about each plant as you hover over your garden and learn what's in there. And you can also look at it like a pollinator. So you can see, this is an approximation, but to feel a bit more like you're just looking at this garden in one particular way, and everyone else may be seeing it very differently to you. And finally, the most exciting bit, I think, is that you can print your planting instructions. And this is the other really important part of the project and that's where I was really inspired by Eden's mission of creating not just a sense of connection with the natural world, but also a sense of agency that we can do something to help. So you can download your planting instructions, see one of these little grids in action, getting ready to learn how to approach the problem, your planting design, and tells you everything you need to buy and suggested plant densities. And the end result is an invitation, essentially, to plant your own Pollinator Pathmaker garden, your own edition of the artwork, and join a growing campaign of gardens, hopefully that extends beyond the UK. And that's the last bit of the puzzle. Is we've got partners like Light Art Space in Berlin who'll be commissioning new editions of the garden project so that we can create new plant lists for other countries as well. And so we hope to seed this sort of network of living artworks around the world.
And Daisy, just a couple more things. The brilliant thing about this piece of art is when pieces of art are taken to other countries and represented in other countries, you usually have to put them on a plane and take them there. but this one you don't. And you were saying that this is we hope that this will be the biggest climate positive artwork in the world, because not only is it helping pollinators, it's also helping to capture carbon. Each of these gardens is capturing carbon and taking it down into the soil. And the team took your website to COP, and many people were really interested there from all over the world. So I'm a little bit scared about how many gardens we're going to get to do.
I'm scared about how many plants I'm going to have to paint if we go to other countries. So
Daisy's planted every one of these plants. Could you just zoom, so you can see the whole garden on the screen? Sure. and go gently right the way through the year, because that's what really gets me. So the little thing along the bottom, look, you push it along and you can see your garden right the way through the year and all the different plants. And that's the first time I've ever really seen that beautifully represented, so that people who are new to gardening, or because Colin, this is in Colin's head all the time, so Colin can see this happening, but for most of us mere mortals, to be able to see those plants. And Daisy, how many different paintings have you done altogether? Because it's more than the plants, because you did them at different stages.
There was about 480 paintings. It was a very painful experience. Luckily, I like flowers, but it is, for me as an amateur gardener, beginner gardener, this was actually incredibly helpful, because when we had these conversations with Colin about what's appropriate and how to even think about this, I can't visualize a garden in my head yet, because I don't know the plants well enough. And that's what's so brilliant working with experts, is to learn. But this is something that I would never have the confidence yet to do as a gardener, is to plant a perennial garden as complex as this. So I've planted one, and I can show you that it is true, that it exists. And so we were inviting people to plant their own and send us pictures. This is Darren, who helped me dig up the turf. I didn't do it all on my own, but I planted a 4x5 meter plot myself. And so I'm hoping I'm going to get this in the spring, but it depends how good I am at defending it from slugs.
So any questions, because we haven't got long left. So any questions for Daisy about the website, about the art installation, and any questions for Colin about how any plant questions about how you get this planted, or any of the things that he came across?
We've had a couple in the chat there, Joe. One around just as it's a website, isn't it? So work on any kind of computer, which makes it really accessible. So that's fantastic. And one about sloping gardens. So you clearly had a bit of a challenge with a slope and a curve. Are there any recommendations for a sloping garden in particular?
Well, I can show you back on the website. We've got a few pictures of the garden at Eden. So this is during planting. This was when it wasn't torrential rain. So you can see we're on quite a steep slope here. And the site itself is curved in two directions. So curved from top to bottom, and curved like a banana as well. And we just put the grid on as best we could, and did some maths and left the rest to the eye. So it doesn't need to be an exact science. What this really is just asking everyone to think, whether you have a garden or not, just to think about why plants matter, and why choosing different plants matters, and where you put plants, and thinking about plants not just as an object, but as a set of interactions. So the pollinators that are interacting have co-evolved with these plants. So it doesn't matter if your lines are wonky, you can, it still counts.
And we were there trying to get them dead straight, Daisy, so that when you're on the visitor centre platform, you can look across. This is a great shot, bird's eye view of the garden, so you can see the sides of it. So Colin, any tips about planting on a steep slope?
I think Daisy's got it there, where she says don't worry too much about it being completely accurate. Obviously, if you're on the flat, it's so much easier. The grid will just transfer. It won't if you have a slope, a concave slope, a convex slope like that one. And so what we did is to, instead of trying to do half-meter squares on the ground, we just took several squares and created this 2.5 square meter square, within which we could then set out the half meters, just because it would have been so impossible to actually create each individual half meter pixel on the ground. So I think it's just be creative and not worry too much about the right plants going exactly where the pixels say, if you have a large area or if you have a particularly difficult area to do. And the plants won't stay still anyway. Once they're in the ground, in the first year or two, they'll probably stay approximately where you are. But if, you know, beyond that, they'll move around. Some things will self-sow, other things will spread. So they'll find their own way. So it's a dynamic thing as well. So
it's up to you how you maintain it. So we're working on the strategy, how we're going to keep it maintained at Eden. And there's going to be another edition planted in Hyde Park in London with the Serpentine next year, as well as the one in Berlin with Light Art Space. And it may be that in a park, like in Hyde Park, it's much more manicured. And in a way, it's up to you as the caretaker of the garden, rather than the gardener, because you're taking care for other organisms. And I see there's a question about minimum size. So on the website, which, as Lindsay said, works on every platform, you will get a higher resolution on an iPad or computer than you will on the phone, but it works everywhere. You are creating a garden that's in 50 centimeter pixels, but Colin has brilliantly worked out how to scale this down. So for flower pots, or to find different ways of doing it. So there's, in the resources section on the website, it explains and suggests how you can scale it down. So you can still have a pattern or multiple species, because of course there is, you know, a requirement that you need somewhere to put this, but we're also really excited to invite schools or community spaces to get involved and just get in touch if they want to use it, because it is intended for, you know, personal use, but we're really hoping to build the side of the campaign where other kinds of spaces can be transformed into living artworks.
Thank you, Daisy. And the other question, and I asked this question as well. Where can we see all of your paintings? Are they on the site?
Yes. So thank you for you know, helping my ego in the plant finder section. So you can also get to this bit when you tap on a plant name in your living artwork bit of the website. But I put in Daisy in the plant finder. There we go. Then it will come up with so obviously I'm biased here, with the individual painting.
I thought you were going to say echiums, actually. We'll have to see the echium as well.
The echium, yeah, so the echium obsession, because it was something I'd never really seen till I got to Cornwall, and I thought this solves all problems, is something that's 3 meters tall, just flowers, and is a huge source of pollen and nectar. So
I'm very endangered in the wild.
The echium?
Yeah.
Well, this is why the one at Eden has 96 echiums.
Yeah. So any more questions from anybody? Nearly at the end of our time now. Oh, anything, Daisy or Colin, that you haven't said that you wished you'd like to say to people?
Last minute.
What I would like to say is I'm so grateful to everyone at Eden for putting up with this mad approach to gardening. I remember when we were planting a few weeks ago, I said to Colin, you know, is this different to how you normally lay out a garden here at Eden? And sort of the eyebrow arched. Yes. So it's been such fun, and I'm really, really hoping that lots of people will plant their own and get involved.
And we had a little hitch at the end, because we were ordering all the plants to come in, and of course they're very specific plants, and then somebody went and moved the Chelsea Flower Show from May to September, and we suddenly realized, oh, hang on, where's that? Why can't we get any of those plants? So Daisy, Colin, Sarah, and everybody else, we were scouring the UK like detectives, trying to seek out specific plants from. So we got in touch with quite a few nurseries, didn't we, Colin?
we did, and it's all right if you need 2 or 3, but when you need a couple of hundred, it gets a bit of a challenge.
Yeah.
But I'd like to say, you know, I think it really helps this planting in thinking about plants from a non-human perspective. This is, you know, it's not something I wasn't thinking about before, but it's really helped with it. And just, I think on the website, you've got a bee's eye view of it as well, haven't you, which we saw. And that just really transforms how you're looking at planting. This isn't just for us. This is part of this much bigger way of thinking about biodiversity crisis, climate change, and doing something about it in your own garden. And for me, it's incredibly powerful. And I hope loads of schools and other people. I know my own daughter's been interested in it, and trying to get her interested in gardening is a bit of a challenge, especially as I drag around all sorts of gardens. And so hopefully it's something which will inspire people in a new way about gardening.
I think to that point, also my dad is watching right now, and so Colin, he will be feeling the same pain about dragging children around gardens. But you know, they come full circle eventually. But the DIY garden I've planted here, I bought some 9-centimeter plants, I bought some seeds and some bulbs, and so there's different ways of doing this for different kinds of budgets. And if you plan ahead now, you can start propagating things to plant in the spring. So there's lots of ways to do it. You know, you can go full show garden and have an instant thing, or you can plan ahead.
Fantastic.
Yeah, thank you both very, very much. And thanks to everybody for listening. Can you all put your videos on, because I want to see who's going to plant a garden now.
Let's see if my dad is.
I'm sure it'd be very popular. I must admit, I did, without this being here, I planted a little wildflower patch, and it was just incredible how it transformed the insect life in my garden. It was just buzzing. So I would thoroughly recommend doing this and getting involved. And what I love about this project is the fact that essentially everyone that's planted is part of this living artwork that's growing and growing and growing. And that's a wonderful thing to feel part of. So I think it's a really exciting initiative, and congratulations on getting it off the ground, Daisy. Into the ground, I should say, probably, which was really Colin's job.